Hello, and welcome to the um, developmentally appropriate practice training. We're going to be talking about some of NACCE's standards when talking about developmentally appropriate practice. We did touch on developmentally appropriate practice, or sometimes known as DAP, in our Working with Children of Different Ages training. There are three core considerations of DAP. Knowing about the child's development and learning. We have to understand typical development in order to help us with our research and help us direct which experiences will support children's learning and development. Understanding typical development and learning at different ages is a crucial starting point. Developmentally appropriate practice is an approach to teaching grounded in research on how young children develop and learn and what is known about effective early education. Its framework is designed to promote young children's optimal learning and development. DAP involves teachers meeting young children where they are, both as individuals and as a part of a group, and helping each child meet challenging and achievable goals. Developmentally appropriate practice is the foundation for all NACCE work, including publications, training programs, conferences, accreditation of child care programs, and more. Every day, early childhood practitioners make many decisions. Teachers need to keep in mind goals for children's learning and the development and be intentional in helping children achieve these goals. The core of developmentally appropriate practice lies in its intentionality, and as they make decisions, teachers consider all of these core considerations. We also must know what is developmentally appropriate for each child. What we learn about specific children helps us refine decisions and approaches about how to teach and care for each child as an individual. By continually observing children's play and interaction with the physical environment and others, we learn about each child's interests, abilities, and developmental progress. When we make learning experiences meaningful and intentional, we get better outcomes, and essentially it's easier for us to reflect on those practices and what works for each of those children, and maybe even children in the future, when we do reflect and use developmentally appropriate practice, and when we find out what is individually appropriate for each child. Let's know what's culturally important. We must make an effort to get to know each children's families and learn about the values, expectations, and factors that help shape their lives at home and in their communities. This background information helps us provide meaningful, relevant, and respectful learning experiences for each child and family. Taken all together, these three core considerations result in a developmentally appropriate practice. There are 10 effective DAP teaching practices. Number one, we're going to let's acknowledge what children do and say, and let children know that we have noticed through comments or by sitting nearby and just observing. Number two, encourage. We must encourage children to be persistent in their efforts rather than just praising and evaluating what the child has done. So walking them through something that may be particularly difficult for them looks wildly different from them just saying good job. We try to stay away from just saying good job because good job doesn't give them specific feedback on what they did well. Give specific feedback rather than just general comments. It's easier for a child to know what they are doing correctly rather than what they're not doing correctly. Model the attitudes and the ways of appropriate problems or approaching problems and behavior towards others, showing children rather than just telling them. We want to also demonstrate the correct way to do something, and this usually involves a procedure that needs to be done in a certain way, such as washing hands. We can demonstrate how to wash hands by modeling it for them, using the 7 hand washing steps that the Air Force tells us to use. Create or add challenge. In the early childhood education world, you're going to hear 2 words, either scaffolding or enriching. When you're scaffolding somebody, you're building them up. You are giving them the tools they need to learn a specific skill. Enriching the experience would be adding on to the experience that they've already mastered. So we want to create or add challenge so that a task goes a bit beyond what the children can already do. For example, lay out a collection of chips and count them together and then ask a few questions about how many are left. And the children count the remaining chips to then help come up with the same answer. That would be adding or creating an additional learning experience for the child. Ask questions. Ask questions that are provoking children's thinking. We want to make sure that when we ask questions, we're asking open-ended questions, not just questions that they can answer yes or no to. For example, what color is the bug? Or where is my shoe? Or what can we do to solve this problem? To reduce challenge, you could simplify the task by guiding the children to touch each chip once they count the remaining chips. Again, going back to the creating or adding challenges. Give assistance, such as a cue or a hint, to help children work on the edge of their current competence. For example, when someone is trying to write their name and you're watching them bring the pencil up and bring the pencil down to make an A, and they just use the point here. You could simplify or say as a cue or a hint, now what goes in the middle? And then put an A line in the middle. Provide information, directly giving children facts, verbal labels, and other information. And lastly, give directions. For children's actions and behavior, you always want to give directions. This gives children specifics on what exactly you're asking them to do and avoids frustration and humiliation. So we're going to go over some of the NAEYC standards. Standard 1, Child Development and Learning in Context. Understand the developmental period of early childhood from birth through age 8 across physical, cognitive, and emotional and linguistic domains, including bilingual and multilingual development. Standard 2, Family-teacher partnerships and community connections. An example of this would be know about and understand the diversity and the value of families. Remember, as a teacher who is going to be working alongside the military, it is important to remember that culture. Children move often. Children's parents deploy often. Children's parents are gone often or even face other familial hardships. Standard 3, Child Observation, Documentation, and Assessment. Understand that assessments, formal and informal, formative and summative, are conducted to make informed choices about instruction and for planning in early learning settings. So we want to know a wide range of types of assessments, their purposes, and their associated methods and tools. This ensures that we are giving the appropriate assessment for each individual child and ensuring that we are not operating out of developmentally appropriate practice. Standard 4, Developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate teaching practices. An example of this would be understand and demonstrate positive, caring, and supportive relationships and interactions as the foundation of early childhood educators working with young children. Understand and use these teaching skills that are responsive to the learning trajectories of young children and to the needs of each child, recognizing the differentiated instruction, incorporating play as a core teaching practice, and supporting the development of executive function, which are skills that are critical for young children. One moment. Standard 5, Knowledge, application, and integration of academic content in the early childhood curriculum. You guys are going to be using the Early Learning Matters curriculum, which is the curriculum that we use here at Hill Air Force Base. Early childhood educators have the knowledge of the content and the academic principles. Language and literacy, the arts, math, social studies, science, technology, and engineering, and physical education are all a part of the early childhood curriculum. We understand central concepts and methods in the tools of inquiry. and the structures in each academic discipline. Educators understand pedagogy, including how young children learn and the process of information in each discipline. If you've never heard that word before, pedagogy means your teaching style. We want to apply knowledge using the early learning standards and other resources to make decisions about spontaneous and planned learning experiences and about curriculum development. We want to understand content knowledge and the essential concepts, methods of tools of inquiry, and the structure and resources for the academic disciplines in an early childhood curriculum. The same place where you'll do your virtual lab school modules is the same place where you can find the Early Learning Matters curriculum. Lastly, Standard 6, professionalism as an early childhood educator. Early childhood educators identify Early childhood educators identify and participate as members of early childhood profession. They serve as informed advocates for young children and for their families of the children in their care and for early childhood professions. They know and use ethical guidelines and other early childhood professional guidelines. They have professionalism and communication skills that are effectively used to support the relationships in working with young children, families, and colleagues. We want to identify and involve ourselves with the early childhood field and serve as informed advocates for young children, for families, and for the profession. We also want to know about and uphold the ethical standards and the professional guidelines for early childhood education and use professional communication skills, including technology, mediated strategies to effectively support young children's learning and development and to work with families and colleagues. When we talk about professionalism, we are also speaking on making sure that we are not using cell phones in the classroom, that we are attentive to the parents' needs, addressing each parent by their names, and ensuring that we are growing relationships with the parents, not just treating them as every other person, just treating them as a member of a family. Families expect us to acknowledge them when they walk into the room. Families also expect us to acknowledge their children when they walk into the room. A good morning, hello, or a simple wave can mean that you're acknowledging a parent, but we want you guys to take it a step further. And that means that we would like you guys to have ongoing reciprocal communication to ensure that we are gathering the correct information needed to take amazing care of their kids. The professional standards and competencies for early childhood educators include child development, understanding each individual child, family community context and other influences on individual development, and the ability to build respectful, reciprocal relationships with families and communities. We also need to use observation and assessment to learn what works for each child and for young children as the community learning together. And use the repertoire of appropriate pedagogical practices. We have to understand the early childhood curriculum and the application of professional knowledge, disposition, and ethics. We talked about this during the NIAC statement of commitment. Oh goodness, and just continuing to make sure that we are upholding those standards. When you guys go through applicable regulations training, it's going to be important to remember that gossip is not tolerated in the workplace. Please ensure that if you guys have issues or situations arises where a person's whose ethical conduct is questioned, please contact your supervisor or your director. Thank you for coming to the Developmentally Appropriate Practice training, and if you have any questions, please see your training and curriculum specialist or your director for more information. Thank you very much.